We often take communication for granted, and when we do, it suffers greatly as a result. We often expect other people to understand the context, purpose, detail, and urgency of our communication, and surprised when the other person fails to do so. But what has happened is the person who was listening to us did not fully understand all aspects of our message due to communication barriers. These barriers are often referred to as noise. So to be a competent communicator, we need to be aware of these barriers and make a conscious effort to overcome them. Now, these barriers can exist at both an interpersonal and organisational level. So what do we mean by interpersonal barriers? Well, there are two interpersonal barriers to communication: deception and aggression. According to Redmond, deception is a significant barrier to interpersonal communication, as receivers mainly believe that the sender is truthful and honest. Now, deception can take many forms. People can create misleading messages deliberately. People can deliberately withhold the truth or omit information to lessen the impact. People can create diversions so they can change the topic to avoid the real subject. And of course, people can deliberately deceive. So how do we compensate for those interpersonal barriers? Well, we can ask ourselves if the message makes sense. Is it actually plausible? We can look for symptoms of nervousness in the communicator's behaviour. Are they averting their eyes, fidgeting? Are they more rigid in their stance, or using a different tone of voice than usual? We can reflect on whether the message matches the body language being displayed. Aggressiveness is a second interpersonal barrier, and obviously it refers to when we're feeling threatened or insulted or challenged. An aggressive communication is usually the result of frustration, lack of communication skills, and lack of verbal ability to debate a point constructively. Now, aggressive communication is often met with an aggressive response, which leads to escalation of the situation. The best way to avoid aggressive communication is by learning to communicate assertively, without hostility and without infringing on the other person's rights. So communicating assertively involves expressing our feelings and the difficulties that we have with the message, asserting our needs and our rights, or empathising with the other person's position whilst maintaining our own. Now, as there are interpersonal barriers to communication, so too there are organisational barriers. And Fisher outlined a number of organisational barriers to communication, amongst them what he termed perceptual selectivity. This is where he talks about a limit to the amount of information that an individual can process before overloading occurs. So agreeable information may be retained, but the remainder may be lost. Another barrier may be termed the black or white perspective, where people view situations as black or white, or people as good or bad, and life doesn't always fit this mould, where there must be room for shades of grey or compromise in life and in decisions. Another organisational barrier may be around implicit assumptions, where the person communicating may have accepted positions based on assumptions that actually don't stand up to scrutiny or debate. Language difference can be a significant organisational barrier. In a multicultural dimension, different cultures, different genders may interpret language differently. Inadequate receiving, where those communicating fail to listen to feedback to their messages. Excessive niceness is a potential organisational barrier, where we don't send negative messages or feedback for fear of offending others or damaging personal relationships. Lack of feedback, failing to give feedback, means that the person giving the message is unsure if the message has been received or understood. Geographic factors can be an issue. Distance from head office, so the message is being diluted each time it's being repeated or each time it's being passed down the chain, so to speak. Task specialisation is a significant organisational barrier to interpersonal communications, where people use specialist terminology and it's difficult for people who don't have the specialist expertise to understand them. Status, power and authority differences are potential barriers to good interpersonal communication, where those in authority may not be open to accept feedback to communication and may demand compliance rather than have two-way communication. And pressure is another potential organisational barrier to interpersonal communication, where pressure of work or organisational stress can lead to misunderstanding of messages and foster conflict as a result. So what does this actually mean? Well, it means that a person is competent in interpersonal communication if they display an ability to work well with others, understand their needs, and is sympathetic to those needs. So you can evaluate your competence in interpersonal communication based on your ability to maintain good working and personal relationships despite communicating regularly with other people. We all believe we're good communicators, but really it's a good idea to take time out and actually benchmark our communication competences in real terms. So if you take a look at behavioural statements like those listed here, draw examples from your own professional life in terms of how you would rate yourself for these types of behavioural statements. No harm to consult a trusted friend if you're unsure how to rate yourself, and then record opportunities that you feel you might be able to avail of to improve your ratings. Elsewhere in this section, there is a very useful interpersonal communication model. The video is on Eric Berne's transactional analysis, and it's useful for understanding interpersonal communications because applying it can help us to control our emotions when we're communicating, particularly if the person with whom we're communicating is exhibiting behaviours that we find frustrating or challenging.